Bigotry and racial prejudice were widespread when black Americans answered the call to defend our country after it was attacked by Japan in 1941. A direct target of this discrimination was the Tuskegee Black Air Corps. How they rose above it and went on to contribute to our nation's victory is an incredible story. I'm Jack Bloom. My esteemed guest today is Robert Maxwell, President of the General B.O. Davis chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen. Welcome to PACE TV. It's a pleasure to have you on our program today.
Thank you.
And I'd like to start off and ask you about when you were a little bit young and how you got involved in the air. I understand that you liked the flying at a very early age.
Well, I was very much interested in aviation
Mm-hmm.
and also in engineering, in things mechanical.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the two areas that I focused on
Right.
when I was young.
Right now, you graduated the CCNY and as an engineer.
That's right.
That was a wonderful school, as I recall.
Very good school and tough to
Tough,
get through.
and you had to compete to get in. You had to take an entrance
That's
test,
correct.
right?
Oh, absolutely.
So after that incident, now you had the background as loving the air. Is this why you decided that the Tuskegee would be something that you would go for?
Well, I think that what happened was that we were involved by the time I graduated, in the war effort. Initially, I went to work as an engineer in the defense industry,
Mm-hmm.
but then the opportunity for pilot training at Tuskegee
Mm-hmm.
presented itself.
Mm-hmm. How did you find the Tuskegee? Is that something that was a known organization for you at the time, or was it recommended to you at the time?
Oh, well, we all knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
Just to talk a minute about how it came about.
Yes.
Prior to World War II, blacks weren't accepted for pilot training
Mm-hmm.
or training for any leadership
Mhm.
positions. But under the pressure of the war, needing to get all the potential participants in the war effort and the pressure from the various civil rights organizations, the War Department decided they had to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And on one hand, they didn't want to train blacks with whites.
Integration.
Yeah, the segregated people that
Mm-hmm.
favored segregation wouldn't permit it. So what was their solution? To set up a separate but equal
Mm-hmm.
training base just to train black pilots.
Mm-hmm.
So they started this in 1941,
Mm-hmm.
and young black men came from all over the country.
Now, how did they accept you? I mean, was the competition when you got there?
Oh, it was the process was one where you went through a series of examinations, and I think the process was the same, whether you were black or white. You went through a certain required admission, and then were accepted for training.
Because I know when I applied for the Air Corps, I had to take an examination to qualify just even to get into the front door. Is that with the same thing with the Tuskegee?
Yeah, basically so. And
So now you get in there. Now, how was your training? What developed after that?
well, it was a very rigid training that we went through. It took almost a year to get our wings, but we finally graduated. And during this time, the training started in 1941, and between 1941 and 1946, there were 992 pilots that were trained at Tuskegee Army Air Base.
Now, when they finally went overseas, and from my understanding, they did not assign them quickly enough to do the escorts to the bombers that were making the raids in Europe. Give us a little history about that.
The first assignment was in North Africa in order to support the operations that the Army had in North Africa, and they performed well right from the beginning. It wasn't until later that they transferred them to a base in Italy, and they were assigned the mission of defending the heavy bombers in their raids over Germany and Romania.
So, and what was the relationship that occurred with those bombers and the white personnel and so on? Was it, of course, it played a major role because their lives depended upon the support that the.
Yeah.
What,
I don't think there was
yeah.
any particular relationship. The bombers had their mission, which is to go and fly and drop their bombs and try to get back in one piece.
Right.
And
Well,
the fighter pilots were out there
To
to
protect
protect them and to shoot down any of the German planes that
Well,
might be attacking.
But the difficulty that they had those days that we didn't have air domination, and that we sustained major losses.
We did.
When the bombers went out. So
That's right.
what type of planes were the Tuskegee flying, and what
Well,
was the range? What was the capability?
Well, at the time that they flying the escort missions, they were flying the P-51, the North American P-51 Mustang. And actually they modified the Mustang to be able to carry wing tanks so that they had a range of 1,000, 1,500 miles, so that they could fly with the bombers all the way to the target and still have enough gas to get
Come back. What was the casualty rates amongst the Tuskegee Airmen who did initially the escorts?
Well, overall, there were about 450 that participated. Of those, about 66 were killed in combat, and another 32 were prisoners of war.
Were they the prisoners of war? Were they subsequently? Did they make it home?
Most of them did, yes. And I mean, even though it was an ordeal in the German prison camps, but most of them made it through successfully.
Do you think the fact that there was such terrible discrimination against blacks, particularly in the Tuskegee, did this sharpen or finally hone your job so you want to even be better than your counterparts?
We knew it was important for us to succeed, and so I believe that we tried very hard to make sure that we were prepared to do the job.
I see. Were you overseas at the time?
I personally was not,
Okay.
because I was a bomber pilot,
Right.
and I flew the B-25 bomber.
I see.
At the time, we were forming a bomber group of B-25s that was scheduled to go to the Pacific.
Yes, I recall when the war was over, we were all slated to go to Japan.
Yep.
And fortunately, we used that little bomb, and which helped us a great deal. Otherwise, perhaps we may not be sitting here right now having this conversation.
That's right. Of course, some people say when the Japanese heard that the Tuskegee Airmen were coming, why they gave up.
Right.
But I think the bomb had something to do with it.
How did this experience being involved with the Tuskegee, how did you react to this? Or how did it affect your lives and so on?
Well, as far as I was concerned, as I said previously, I already had my engineering degree and had started work as an engineer. So I went back to that and spent the next 20, 30 years working in the aerospace industry, working in the transportation field. So I didn't really have anything to do with the Tuskegee Airmen until just within the last 10 years or so.
I see.
Meanwhile, the Tuskegee Airmen had formed an organization, a nonprofit organization called the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. And the purpose of this was, first of all, to make sure people were aware of what had been accomplished.
Recognition.
But even more important, to work with the young people and to show them that there are opportunities, if they will only apply themselves, to move forward in the aviation and other fields.
Well, a wonderful thing happened recently. Finally, recognition was now given to the Tuskegee. And our president in Washington, D.C., had a reunion and an awards ceremony. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Actually, this was introduced by two members of Congress, Senator Carl Levin from Michigan and Representative Charles Rangel from New York. They introduced a bill to award the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. When they came to us and said, well, now who should get it? Well, we said everyone that participated in this training and the combat operations, regardless of whether they were pilots or not, the mechanics and the ground crew and all of the support people, they were an integral part of this success, and they should all get it. And so we identified some 300 individuals who were still living and could travel to Washington as the recipients for this medal.
Well, that must have been quite an occasion.
It was, and it was an awesome occasion. It was. We had the leaders of the Congress making presentations. We had General Colin Powell, former Secretary of State, making remarks, and it was just a wonderful ceremony.
I know that President said that he said sometimes you salute the dead, but he was grateful that he saluted the people who are alive, to accept the salute and to accept the congratulations and for the long overdue the duties and the generosity and the bravery that the Tuskegee encountered. And,
yes, it was a very great ceremony, and as Lee Archer, who was the ace and the combat pilot, said, well, it was a little late, but it was nice to get that recognition.
Well, it took a lot of years, and I think that our country's finally realized, and while it took a lot of years to do that, but you know, there's nothing like acclamation and recognition. And
That's right.
The job that the Tuskegee did was unusual, so much so, as I recall, they weren't even saluted. The officers were not even saluted properly as they walked through and in their lives as an officer and so on.
A number of incidents did occur like that, where even though they were officers and even though they had combat veterans, they were not given recognition. In fact, at several of the bases where they were stationed, they had an officers' club there, but they were prevented from entering the officers' club.
Is that right?
So those things were a little bit of a you know, I'd say annoyance. They really, most of the men that were subjected to this really resented the fact that they were not treated properly. But when they presented this during the ceremony, they had a program, and on the program for this event were these words, and I'd like to read them to you, if you would.
Please share it with us.
The program said, "On freedom's wings, bound for glory, these intrepid men roam the sky in defense of liberty for all men. Before the Air Force shattered the sound barrier, the Tuskegee Airmen shattered the race barrier. Their deeds will forever be etched in the annals of those who sought freedom and justice."
Isn't that wonderful?
Well, I thought that was very appropriate
And
for
the
this
speech,
ceremony.
having read the speech that our president did about paving the way for future generations of black, which you actually opened up the door for young black people to get that acknowledgement and to have the opportunities now, which you fought for such a long time.
Yes, I think that is one of the major results, was the fact that doors were open, and now the opportunities that are there, regardless of race, creed, ethnic background, the opportunity is there, and the message that we try to get out to the young people is, prepare yourself and go after those opportunities that exist.
Well, what successes are you getting now? You know, we have a new generation. We have a new thinking process. We have young blacks, young American blacks today who have not gone through your experience, have never known that particular, while they feel prejudice, but they certainly don't feel it to the same degree as you have done. And their opportunities, when you think in terms, it's a difference of day to night when you think about it. So how have they responded? What is their attitude?
When we go out and talk to them, their response has been very positive. And we like to think that we are making a difference to them. Just today, there's a news story on the wires of a young black man, 23 years old, who is flying solo around the world. He's started here in Florida. He's from Florida and flew over Europe. He's over the Middle East now, heading for India.
Really?
And, you know, the fact that he even would attempt to do such a thing, we're very pleased that he's doing that.
Well, this is the year 2007 as compared to the year into the 40s, correct?
That's right.
Well, so actually, the feeling that because I love history, what I see is that this influence that occurred, the Tuskegee Airmen, the influence that they have rendered now, not only on the black young people, but on the entire black population, to show that the equality, the mentality, the training, and the expertise knows no discrimination.
Yes.
And that, to me, I saw very, very clearly. And I think, are you in any way making this so evident to young people? Do you go around to speak to clubs and associations and so on?
Yes, that is a major part of our activity, is going around and talking to schools and boys and girls clubs and getting across to the young people that, you know, it's not going to be handed to you. You're going to have to prepare yourself. One of the famous people that came out of the Tuskegee experience was a fellow by the name of Chappie James, and he became a 4-star general.
In the Air Corps?
In the Air Corps, in the Air Force.
Air Force.
And he used to go out and talk to the young people, and he used to tell them that, you know, when we were down at Tuskegee, we were prepared, and we grabbed the ball and ran with it. And he says, what you need to do is to prepare yourself so that when your Tuskegee opportunity comes, you will be prepared and be able to grab the ball and run with it.
Well, that's very exciting. What comes to my mind is that we do have ghettos today. We have young blacks today who find no destination and feel that society is passing them. They're involved in a culture, in many instances, that tie them down. Yes. And they can't go beyond that because of the constraints that they feel inward as well as outward. How can you reach these young black people to make them come into society, to be productive? Yes. And you know, we don't have the opportunity of a war, which to home them. What would you do with those youths?
Well, the only thing that we're able to do is to go and talk with them. But you're absolutely right. And of course, the progress that has been made through the years, I mean, Tuskegee Airmen were instrumental in getting some of the barriers broken down, but the entire civil rights movement, the people like Martin Luther King and, of course, Rosa Parks and all the people that in the 60s, they contributed very significantly toward getting these barriers broken down. But we still are living in a society where a large percentage of African Americans are living below the poverty level without the education. And so we still have a lot of work to be done.
Well, I recognize that, but when you think in terms of sports, the participation of the blacks in sports, in basketball, in football, in the Olympics, for the matter of fact, and they are the role models of young blacks today.
It's true.
And there are more. I think there are more black participants in sports than in any other, from baseball on, and from every sport. It would seem to me that the young blacks should take pride in seeing this and would in some way endeavor to do something about their lives.
Well, I think you're just seeing one part of the population. There are many young blacks who are getting the education, getting the college degrees, the advanced degrees, moving into business in various operations. So there has been and is a lot of progress, but there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Well, you know, I've always encouraged young people, if they are at crossroads of their lives, to think in terms of the military. If you get involved in the military, it's the discipline that seems to be lacking today in young people. It would create a discipline that they've never had. They would experience an education which is open to them. They would have so many different opportunities. Would you suggest perhaps maybe military training for young blacks, even for whites for that matter of fact, but for blacks in particular who are at crossroads of their lives and are stuck within that ghetto syndrome?
Well, we certainly encourage young blacks to, for one thing, apply to the various service academies, Air Force academies, West Point, the Naval Academy, where you get a wonderful education and the opportunity then to move into key positions in the military. So there are those opportunities, and we try to encourage. We go and talk to a lot of the ROTC and junior ROTC groups and encourage them to stay with it, because that is one area of opportunity.
So what you're saying then, the Tuskegee people today in your various chapters are concerned with the young element that is involved, the young blacks today, and how they can redirect their thinking process and their actions today.
We are very concerned.
Is this goes on through your entire chapters at this point in time?
I think we're very concerned. And the various the Civil Rights Organization, the NAACP, and the Urban League are also very concerned about our young people and trying to get them on the proper paths. So that's our challenge today, is to try to do what we can to do that.
Well, I think the awareness itself is great. The other day I was just reading an article about the cowboys, the black cowboys that fought with against the Indians and so on.
Yeah.
Now this is a history that people don't seem to know.
Well, a lot of it didn't go into the history books, and in fact, one of at this ceremony that we had in Washington, I thought Colin Powell briefly reviewed the contribution that blacks had made down through the years from the Civil War on up. And when Teddy Roosevelt went up San Juan Hill, he had black soldiers there supporting him.
They were part of the Rough Riders.
That's right. So African Americans have played an important role in every war that this country has fought, and are playing an important role now today. But there's a lot of room for improvement, of course, increasing that potential.
I think that the emphasis, history, you can't rewrite history if history was made already. And I think that if the young blacks today knew its history, I don't think they know the Rough Riders, the blacks that participated. I don't know whether they know the accomplishments, other than the fact that they feel in some way insecure. And I think history itself is well worthwhile learning. And if I had anything to do with the getting the information out to the blacks, the young people, that concerns me a great deal, because there's a huge population out there that's really not into the main society and it's at the sidelines, so to speak, and they have a lot to contribute.
Yes.
And I think part of the contribution that you've made with the Tuskegee to come into that arena completely discriminated against, and then be part of winning the war for our country in its contributions that were made. And that in itself should be so prideful to young people. And I don't know what else you can possibly do than to get that message out. And do you think that it's going on deaf ears, or do you think that you're making some form of an impact?
I think we're making an impact. I think we are influencing them. But there's a large number of young people out there, so we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, do you think that you should have more representatives that go into the inner cities to articulate this message?
Well, you're asking, what is the solution to this problem? I don't think we can come up with it in this short
I don't think that
discussion.
we can do it here now, but I've often felt, because I love history, and you can't change history, but you certainly can utilize that history to take a lesson, both good and bad, of what it has to offer. And I think
that's very true.
And when you think of times of the Tuskegee and the men who came out, and what did they become? They became doctors and lawyers and scientists.
And people, also they serve their communities in various ways. The mayor of Detroit, the secretary of transportation, the borough president of Manhattan.
Absolutely.
They've contributed significantly to their communities. Now, how we can get the great majority of the minority youth working towards those ends.
You can only use that as an example. We have a limited amount of time now. I just want to say that it's been, for me, a privilege and a pleasure to have this conversation with you. In addition to being a Tuskegee Airman and your background and the fact that you started pretty early in life by recognizing what you had to do, and you did go into CCNY, which was at that time a very highly recognized college. It used
to be called the poor man's Harvard.
The poor man's Harvard. But look what happened to the generation. Look what that generation precipitated. When we all came out of World War II, we all went to school. We tried to elevate ourselves. We went into so many different things, and all these Tuskegee Airmen that I've met have been professional people. So I have to congratulate those men who served, those men who took it on the chin, and they became leaders and somebody that you had to be exceptionally grateful for. And the mark that was made on that will always be in our society. And the fact that you've just got this recognition, even though a little bit late, shows that everybody has recognized what you've done and how you've done and the sacrifices that you've made. Thank you again for sharing this most exciting part of your life. It's been a pleasure for me to have you as my guest.